I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's do an update on Syria, specifically the talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Erdogan. The talks took place in Sochi, if I'm not mistaken, and it was a marathon discussion, actually, I think around 7-8 hours before.
That's right.
And it took a long time to even get a statement out. I mean, we were a whole day waiting for more detail as to what was decided between these two leaders. So, Alexander, take us into what happened.
As you rightly say, a 7-hour marathon meeting. There would definitely have been more meetings between the various experts, the technical experts, the Russian and Turkish technical experts. And just to say also, this meeting was preceded by 2 telephone conversations between Erdogan and Putin, which had happened over the previous days. So we are looking at a very, very complex negotiation in Sochi, which is Russia's seaboard resort city on the Black Sea, where Putin has as president of Russia, has a major residence, and where detailed negotiations happen, and where he was simultaneously, this gives you an idea what a busy man Putin is, he was hosting various African leaders for a Russian-African summit. But let's also say something else. There were also other parties, as well as the Russians and the Turks, engaged in this negotiation. Lavrentiev, who is the Russian diplomat who's Putin's representative in Syria, was apparently also speaking to the Kurds. And Putin himself, after he finished speaking with Erdogan, telephoned Bashar al-Assad. I'm absolutely sure that the Iranians were being kept informed also. And there is no doubt, too, in my mind, that so was Donald Trump and the United States. So we are looking at a very complex marathon negotiation. The key negotiators were the Russians and the Turks, and they've ironed out an agreement. And I'm going to say immediately that, having read this agreement, it is, for me, signs up the very last chapter of the Syrian war, because this agreement, it's called a Statement of Understanding, sets out very clearly what is now supposed to happen. The Syrian army is going to enter the Kurdish areas, and it's going to take control of towns like Manbij, which has been a contested town, and Kobani on the Turkish border. The Turks are going to be allowed to enter a particular zone within Syria, but it's going to be a fairly small, compacted zone. It's going to be able to extend in 1 or 2 places around 30 kilometers deep into Syria, but it's not going to be very big. Some of these pictures we've seen on maps of the vast buffer area that Erdogan was talking about, he's not going to get it. There will be Russian and Turkish patrols in many of these places where the Syrian army is going to be based. That is a sop by the Russians to Erdogan to make Erdogan look better, so that he can go back to the Turkish people and he say, look, the Russians are treating us with great respect. We've achieved something. We're going to have our people on the ground, but the Russians will always be there with them. And the Kurdish militia is going to pull out of all of these areas. Now, the key takeaway out of all of this, the Syrians are back in northeast Syria. The United States has recognized that fact. It's pulling its troops out. So is Turkey. This is the first agreement in which Turkey recognizes the Syrian Arab army, the army of the Syrian government based in Damascus, as the legitimate army of Syria. It is a major step forward towards the Turkish government, towards Erdogan, once again acknowledging the reality that Bashar al-Assad is the president of Syria. Hasn't quite come to that point yet, but he is very close to doing so. And last but not least, there's two other elements to this agreement. Firstly, the Turks recognize Syria's independence and territorial integrity. That means that the whole of Syria, every inch and millimeter of Syrian territory, is eventually to return to Syrian government control. And secondly, that they also accept that the Adana agreement, this is an agreement that Erdogan and Assad negotiated together back in 1997 before the two fell out. That agreement allows the Turkish military to enter Syria if there's problems with the Kurds up to an area of 10 kilometers. That remains in effect and will govern relations between Syria and Turkey in future. So the Turks are taking the first major step towards accepting that the Syrian war is over and that Damascus, the government in Damascus, headed by Bashar al-Assad, is a legitimate government and is once again responsible, will ultimately take responsibility and re-achieve control of the whole of Syrian territory. And the practical, immediate result is that they recognize that the Syrian Arab army, the official army of Syria, is once more back in control of this vast area of Syrian territory that up till very recently had been controlled by the Kurds.
You mentioned that Turkey is now recognizing, Syrian territory, Alexander, up to the last millimeter.
Yes.
There's a lot of talk about the U.S. leaving some forces in Syria, especially where there's oil, in the regions where they have oil production. Is the U.S. coming around to recognizing Syrian territory up to the last millimeter?
Yes, right. Now, there is a huge difference between the United States government, because that's bitterly divided. We've seen that the deep state agencies of the United States are incredibly angry and unhappy about these developments and have been obstructing them in every conceivable way that they can. What has happened is that Donald Trump, who I have no doubt is at some level being kept informed of all of these discussions, is going along with them. He acted almost as soon as this agreement was concluded to lift all the sanctions on Turkey. He's kept 200 troops, he says, in control of the oil fields, 200 isolated troops cut off from all the others. They're not going to stay there for very long. It's a sop to the deep state lobby that is still very angry about what he has done. Everybody expects the US to leave Syria entirely, and I predict it will do so within a few weeks.
That is a big win for the United States. I want you to explain why it's a big win for the United States. Alexander, explain why this is a big win for Turkey, why this is a massive win for Russia, and most importantly, for Syria.
Right. It is a big
that's how
win.
I see it. I see it as a win-win.
No, I agree.
Finally.
I entirely have the same view. Can I just say something? I think Donald Trump has acted in accordance with the true interests of the United States.
He should be commended for it.
Absolutely.
Hate him all you want, criticize him all you want. On this point, he should be commended for it.
Absolutely. All that war in Syria has done, apart from kill tens upon hundreds of thousands of people, displace millions of others, cause enormous misery, is it's done two things. Firstly, it has increased anger within the region against the United States, so that many people see the United States as even more of an enemy than they once did. But it has also strengthened hugely the US's real enemies in the region, who are the violent jihadi terrorist networks like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And let us never forget that Al-Qaeda launched the terrorist attacks on the United States in 9/11. Those groups have been destroyed. ISIS has been destroyed. Al-Qaeda is clinging on in an enclave in northwest Syria, in Idlib province. They're not going to be there for very much longer. The interests of the United States were not being served by allowing these terrorist groups to establish themselves in independent statelets on Syrian territory, where they could have prepared and launched further terrorist attacks on the United States. The interests of the United States were not being served by committing US troops and US resources, tens upon tens of billions of dollars, to a fruitless war to try to destabilize and overthrow the government of Bashar al-Assad, when the only effect would have been to entrench jihadi terrorism in the Middle East. And the United States' interests anyway were not being served by a destabilized Middle East, which is in a state of great violence. From the United States' point of view, this was entirely the correct step. And last but not least of all, withdrawing from Syria, ending this dangerous relationship with the Kurds in Syria, and who were using the United States to try to promote the establishment of their own independent statelet within the Middle East, was antagonizing Turkey, the United States' key NATO ally in the region, and was creating more problems for the United States with other regional powers. What Donald Trump has done is that he may have saved the US's long-term relationship with Turkey, with its key NATO ally. Donald Trump has acted entirely appropriately and properly. He has acted in a sensible way, in a correct, realistic way, in accordance with US national interests. Now, who are the other big winners here? I believe that obviously Syria is a huge winner. It has survived. It has survived. It has not gone the way of Iraq or Libya. The government of Syria is still there. Syria's institutions are still there. The country retains its independence. It retains its ability to operate as a proper state. So this has been a huge achievement, and it will, in the end, increase the Syrian people's self-confidence and the prestige of Syria in the Arab world. That's not a small thing. I think Turkey has come out well from this agreement because, frankly, this extraordinary attempt by Turkey to try to establish itself in some kind of neo-Ottoman imperial role in Syria was ultimately threatening Turkey itself. It was leading to the creation of a Kurdish statelet on Turkey's borders, which was dangerous for Turkey. And more importantly, and even more dangerously, it was leading Turkey to become increasingly involved with these violent and very dangerous jihadi terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which were reaching a very close point to establishing a presence within Turkey itself. Turkey has been itself the subject of repeated terrorist attacks by these organizations. And lastly, Russia has hugely enhanced its prestige. It has the country that in the end took this disastrous situation that the Obama administration had created in Syria and in the Middle East, and through patient and careful diplomacy, by talking with all the surrounding powers, with Iran, with Turkey, with Syria, with the United States also, they've managed to piece it all together. And we must not forget, of course, the critical role that their military played in Syria itself. So it's a win-win situation. I should mention one other power. Iran has also come out well from it too, because, of course, Iran is the great ally of Syria. It is also an opponent and a victim of jihadi terrorist groups. So from their point of view, the defeat of these groups and the survival of Syria is also a big gain.
All right. So what's next, Alexander, in this process? Where do we go
Right.
from here?
Well, right. There's two things. Two things are going to happen. Firstly, there will be a period of stabilization along the border. Then, at some way and in some form, the Syrian army is going to have to move back in to these areas which the Turks have occupied. Afrin, the areas. Northern Idlib province, where, as I said, the jihadis are still holding out. Um, um, the areas that the Turks are occupying now as a result of their latest operation, and Al-Tanf, where the United States still has a base on the Jordanian border. It's not doing anything, but it's still there, and the oil fields. So this is going to have to be negotiated, but I predict that we're going to see less and less fighting and more negotiation and diplomacy in order to re-establish control there. Then the second thing that's going to happen, I predict, is that there's going to be negotiations within the format of the Syrian Constitutional Committee that the Russians, the Iranians, and the Turks have built up together to try to come up with some kind of new Syrian constitution. But I predict that Syria will remain a unified country, and I predict that Bashar al-Assad will remain as president. Syria will be readmitted into the Arab League. Syria will patch up its relations with Turkey. I think that's now only a matter of time. We will return to something approaching the situation which existed before 2011, but I expect that there will be significant reforms within Syria itself. And the Syria that emerges out of this crisis will be a different and, I think, probably better country than it was when it was before the war began. So a lot to do. Now, there are some longer term issues. The Russians have now established a significant military presence in Syria. I wonder for how much longer that will continue. They've negotiated the presence of certain bases in Syria. I think they will hold on to these bases, but I think that they will try to restrict themselves to those bases. And I think that you will see that the Russians will try to slowly disassociate themselves from intimate involvement in Syrian domestic politics. But that's a problem for the future. I think that over the next year, we will see the final end to the conflict. The war itself is now largely ended. There will be some fighting in Idlib province, but everywhere else, the war itself is ended. The conflict is not yet ended quite yet, but it will be ended now through negotiation rather than force.
All right, Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, hit that subscribe button. Also click that like button and share the channel with everybody you know. You can get a copy of this video in audio format. Follow us on iTunes and on Soundcloud. And also donate to the Duran, PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. You'll find all those links of everything I mentioned in the description box down below under the video, and you'll also find links under the video to our Duran shop where you can pick up some shirts and some magic mugs. That's right.
Mugs
and
like
we have the same shirt today.
We have the same shirt today. As I say, two great minds think alike. So we're the two Alexes, and we're wearing the same shirts, and with the same Duran double-headed eagle, which is different from this double-headed eagle that you see on our mug, on this mug. And we both actually got the same mug. It is, in fact, the double-headed eagle of the Russian Federation, which is highly appropriate because it's also the double-headed eagle that Vladimir Putin has on the mugs, on his mugs. So he will have been drinking from a mug like this with this emblem during that marathon 7-hour session that he was negotiating with Erdogan. And so I suspect was Erdogan, by the way. So, this is the mug that embodies diplomacy and the realist school of diplomacy, of which our program is a great exponent. So, beautiful mug, 15 ounces. I'm drinking tea from mine at the moment. Amazing shirts, 100% cotton, beautifully made by a great supplier. we also have a great supply for our mugs. That's why our products are so good. That's why people are trying to copy them and doing a bad job of it, whereas our products are superb. You can find amazing shirts, t-shirts like these. You can also find long sleeve shirts, V-neck shirts. You can find polo neck shirts. You can also find hoodies, stickers, hats. You can find books also. We've got some books in our shop. You've got to find amazing things. Alex has been refreshing our product range. So lots of great things you can find there. Alex will show you how to go to our shop, help the Duran, help yourself. Alex will tell you how to do it.
You'll find the link for the Duran shop down in the description below, and you can also just go to theduranshop.com to pick up some great merchandise. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Till next time, everybody, take care.